Please note, Night Terrors is for a mature audience only. Episodes may contain violent images and extreme gore.
Welcome, weary travelers, to another night in the Grove. Tonight, we journey into a world ravaged by horrors far beyond the grasp of mere mortals. A night where eldritch creatures reign, and a lone hunter carves her way through the abyss. You see, dear listeners, there are those who survive, and then there are those who hunt. Gather close, for this is the story of a warrior who walks the razor's edge between life and death, on the night when the veil between worlds is thinnest. This is her Halloween. But beware, for not all monsters come from the shadows, and even the strongest hunter can find herself hunted. Now, let us begin.
The wind hissed through the skeletal remains of the old carnival, the rusting rides swaying like ghosts of the past. Once, this place had been filled with laughter and light. Now, it was just another battlefield, one she had walked into willingly. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. She moved silently through the shadows, her sharp eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Her gear was heavier than it had been in the early days, but that weight was comfort now, each piece meticulously chosen, every weapon a tool of survival honed to perfection. The faded patch on her pack read Miss Young, a small piece of a world that no longer existed. But Miss Young was who she had been before the world turned into this hellscape. Tanya Young had once been a school teacher, shaping young minds and navigating the chaos of a classroom. She had led field trips to places like this very carnival, guiding children through their joys of life, never imagining that she would one day return to these grounds as a hunter, not of knowledge, but of the undead. The change had come swiftly, violently. Halloween night, years ago, the night the witches tore the veil between worlds and let the darkness in. The witches' coven had been angry, bitter from centuries of persecution, forced to hide their power from a world that feared them. They'd grown tired of being the hunted and had decided that Halloween, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest, would be their moment to take control. Their goal was simple: open the veil, tap into the vast well of otherworldly power, and use it to reshape the world in their favor. But their arrogance was their downfall. The creatures that came through the breach were not formless horrors. They wore the faces of Halloween itself. Eldritch entities, powerful beyond reason, took on the shapes of humanity's worst fears: shambling zombies, spectral mummies, and skeletal figures. It was as though the magic that brought them into the world twisted them into familiar forms, mocking the traditions of the holiday that once held only playful fear. These were no longer costumes. They were real, nightmarish reflections of the darkness unleashed by the witches. Tanya had survived that first night, but the woman she had been, the kind, patient teacher, died along with her town. In her place, a warrior was born. Years of fighting had shaped her into a finely honed weapon. Every move she made was calculated and deadly. Her arsenal had grown over time, turning her into a finely tuned survivor. Strapped across her back was a sleek, tactical tomahawk, its carbon steel blade honed to a razor's edge. It had saved her life more times than she could count, splitting skulls with brutal efficiency. A finely crafted machete hung at her waist, the blade reinforced for durability, perfect for cutting through both overgrowth and undead flesh. Her custom-made revolver rested snugly in its holster, its pearl grip gleaming faintly, a symbol of her precision and care. Then there were her knives, plenty of them. Throwing knives were strapped to her thigh, a survival knife tucked into her boot, and a curved karambit for close-quarters combat, each one selected for a specific purpose. She knew how to wield them all with deadly precision. But her most prized weapon was a sleek crossbow slung over her shoulder, silent, deadly, and reliable. She had modified it over time, making it lighter, faster, and more accurate than anything she could find. A quiver of bolts hung at her side, each one sharpened and ready to fly. It was perfect for taking down the creatures from a distance without alerting the rest of the horde. She'd learned to navigate this new world where stealth and strategy were as important as strength. Her reflexes were lightning fast, her senses sharper than ever before. Years of surviving had made her more than just a survivor. She was a predator, a master of her environment, a force to be reckoned with. She knew every inch of her weapons and her surroundings. Her movements were deliberate, fluid, and lethal. In a fight, she was relentless, calculating every strike, exploiting weaknesses, and never wasting energy. Her ability to stalk and eliminate her targets had earned her a reputation among other survivors, though she rarely interacted with them. She preferred to work alone, relying only on herself. It was Halloween again, the one night when the worlds were so close together that eldritch entities could be killed permanently. Any other night, killing one of the creatures was a temporary fix. They would renew their connection to both worlds, making them immortal. But tonight was different. Tonight, she could kill the Hollow Specter, and it would stay dead. The Specter was the creature that controlled this region, feeding off the zombies it had enslaved. The pumpkin-headed undead were mere extensions of its power, and killing the Specter would destroy them all. It was no longer a question of survival. It was a matter of extermination. A faint rustle broke the silence, and the hunter froze, crouching low behind the crumbling remains of the popcorn stand. Her sharp eyes caught the flicker of movement ahead. A zombie, its grotesque pumpkin-like head swaying on decayed shoulders. A low growl rumbled from its throat, soon echoed by the others as they stumbled into view, their hollow eyes searching, hungering for prey. The warrior had been prepared to let them pass, to remain hidden and conserve her energy. But then she saw it. A tomcat, scarred and battered, darted between the rusted stalls. The animal's left eye was clouded, a jagged scar running down its face. Its body was lean, malnourished, but it moved with the cautious grace of a survivor, just like her. It hissed at the advancing zombies, arching its back, but it was outnumbered and outmatched. The warrior's heart clenched. She couldn't let this happen. With one fluid motion, she was on her feet, the tomahawk in her grip. Silent and swift, she stalked toward the creatures, each step a calculated move in the dance of death she had perfected over the years. The first zombie didn't see her coming. Its rotting head split with a sickening crack as her tomahawk cleaved through it, dark, coagulated blood spraying across her arm. Bones splintered beneath the force of her strike, and the body dropped in a heap, twitching as it began to disintegrate into a mass of putrid sludge. She didn't stop. The second creature was already turning, its jaws opening in a distorted scream, but she moved faster. Her machete sliced through its neck, severing the head in one brutal motion. The decapitated body stood for a moment, twitching, before collapsing to the ground with a sickening thud. The head rolled, its eyes still glowing dimly, before finally going dark. More came, 2 more. The third lunged at her with rotting arms outstretched, blackened nails scraping the air. The warrior dodged, her movements precise, controlled, She drove her crossbow bolt into the creature's throat, the force of the shot causing its neck to explode in a spray of congealed blood and viscera. It gurgled and thrashed, clawing at the shaft embedded in its windpipe before collapsing in a heap of gore. The last zombie growled, rushing her, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. It swiped at her with clawed hands, its pumpkin head jerking unnaturally with each step. The warrior met it head-on. She pivoted, her tomahawk swinging down with a ferocity that split the creature's chest open. Ribs cracked, snapping like dry twigs, and its flesh peeled apart in chunks, revealing dark, decaying organs that spilled onto the ground with a sickening splatter. The creature gurgled once more before falling lifeless at her feet. Blood and entrails coated the ground around her. The hunter wiped the gore from her blade, her breath steady despite the violence. She turned, her gaze landing on the tomcat. It had retreated to a nearby stall, hissing in defiance, its lone good eye glaring at her. She made no sudden movements, knowing the cat had lived too long on its own to trust easily. The cat began to slink away, but then paused. It turned, its one working eye meeting hers, as if acknowledging the life she had spared. For a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. Then the cat disappeared into the night. The warrior stood slowly, watching the shadows where the tomcat had vanished. A rare smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She had saved a life, no matter how small, and that was enough. She moved like a shadow through the amusement park, her steps silent, her body low to the ground. The air was thick with tension, the distant creak of old rides blending with the wind's moan. Each structure loomed like a ghost from another time, their colors faded, their magic long dead. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Every sense was on high alert. She knew better than to let her guard down. The eldritch creature was close. She could feel it in the heavy pull of the air, the way the ground itself seemed to resist her movements. The creatures it controlled were everywhere, but she had no desire to face them head-on. Not yet. Stealth was her best defense here, and she moved with a purpose, avoiding contact whenever possible. As she approached one of the dilapidated structures, her eyes caught the shape of a figure standing in the shadows. Instinct took over. Before she could think, her hand reached to her thigh, gripping one of her throwing knives. She flicked her wrist, the blade spinning through the air, a metallic glint in the moonlight as it buried itself deep into the target. A hollow thunk. The hunter narrowed her eyes and approached, careful as ever. When she drew closer, the truth revealed itself. The figure wasn't one of the creatures at all. It was a mannequin. A grotesque thing dressed in the tattered remains of a clown outfit, its plastic face cracked and broken, paint peeling from where a smile had once been, a relic from the park's past. She let out a slow breath, yanking the knife free and wiping it clean on her pant leg. The tension in her muscles didn't fade. She knew this place had many tricks. This had just been one of them. Her hand moved to the special pouch on her belt. Inside, nestled carefully, was the knife she had crafted for one purpose: to face the creature she now hunted. The blade was not forged from the finest materials, no steel or tempered alloys. No, this knife was pure iron, simple, unrefined. It wasn't the most effective weapon, not for most tasks, but iron had its own kind of power. In its simplicity, its purity, there was strength. Iron was from the earth itself, and it had been said for centuries to be an enemy to beings like the Eldritch. She had sharpened the blade herself, carefully honing it to a razor's edge. It was the only thing that could effectively slice through the creature's unnatural skin and do real damage. The closer she got to the heart of the park, the stronger the pull became. She knew the creature was near. Her breath steadied. Her grip tightened on the iron blade. Every muscle in her body coiled, prepared for the inevitable battle. Then from the darkness, it emerged. The Hollow Specter. It loomed before her, its grotesque form shifting and twisting, shadows writhing across its body like living things. Its glowing, hollow eyes locked onto her, and the air around it crackled with dark energy. The hunter narrowed her eyes, her muscles coiled like a spring. This was the moment. The creature struck first, a massive clawed limb slashing through the air. She barely dodged, rolling to the side as the ground where she had stood erupted in a shower of dust and debris. Her heart raced, but her body moved with practiced precision. She wasn't going to let this thing overwhelm her. Gripping her tomahawk tightly, she darted forward, aiming for one of its limbs. The blade met flesh, sinking into the creature's dark, oozing skin. The impact sent a shock up her arm, but she gritted her teeth and tore the weapon free, black blood spraying across the ground. The creature roared in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The limb lashed out again, faster this time. She ducked, just narrowly avoiding its grasp, then followed up with a quick slash of her machete, slicing through the writhing shadows that made up the creature's body. It screeched, reeling back as part of its form disintegrated into nothingness. But the warrior knew better than to relax. The specter was relentless. The battle raged on. Every time the creature lunged at her, she countered, using her speed and agility to outmaneuver its massive limbs. Her weapons cut deep, leaving gashes in the eldritch flesh. But the creature seemed endless, its form regenerating almost as quickly as she could damage it. The black, oily blood pooled around her feet, and the ground became slick and unstable. But she didn't falter. The creature slammed one of its clawed arms into the ground with enough force to send a shockwave through the earth, causing her to stumble. It lunged again, faster this time, its massive jaws snapping at her. She rolled out of the way just in time, her hand brushing against one of her throwing knives as she came to a crouch. Without hesitation, she hurled the knife into the creature's eye. The blade embedded itself deep into the glowing hollow, and the specter let out a guttural roar, thrashing wildly as dark blood poured from the wound. Taking advantage of its momentary disorientation, she leaped into action. She jumped onto one of its limbs, using the momentum to propel herself over its flailing arm. Her body twisting in midair, her tomahawk raised high as she came down hard, burying the blade into the creature's shoulder. The creature screeched, the sound like nails on glass, but it wasn't enough. With the creature momentarily staggered, she rolled to the ground, came up on her feet, and in one fluid motion, pulled out the iron knife. The weapon gleamed in the dim light, a symbol of the purity and simplicity it carried. She knew the moment was now. Ducking under another swipe from the specter's remaining limb, she dove forward, her body moving like liquid as she slid beneath its massive chest. With a swift upward slash, she drove the iron blade across the creature's torso. The blade cut through its eldritch flesh like butter, leaving a deep, ragged gash that oozed black blood. But before she could land another blow, the creature's remaining limb lashed out, catching her around the waist. The force of the strike knocked the wind from her lungs, and she felt herself lifted into the air, the iron knife slipping from her grasp as she struggled to break free. The hollow specter tightened its grip, its twisted form writhing as it pulled her limbs in opposite directions. Pain shot through her body, her bones threatening to snap under the pressure. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but the creature's grip was ironclad. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a movement, a blur of gray. The tomcat, the one she had saved, was sprinting toward the creature. With a feral hiss, it leaped onto one of the specter's limbs, claws outstretched. The cat sank its claws deep into the creature's skin, tearing and biting with a viciousness born of survival. The creature howled in pain, its grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She fell to the ground, gasping for breath, but there was no time to waste. With her free hand, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a large, shimmering crystal of pure selenite. Years ago, she would have scoffed at anyone who told her that crystals had real power. To her, they'd always been part of some New Age nonsense, pretty rocks that people thought could heal wounds or ward off bad energy. She laughed at the idea back then, but now, After everything she had seen, after the witches tore open the veil between worlds and these creatures poured through, she didn't laugh anymore. Selenite wasn't just a pretty rock. It was a cleanser, a purifier. It had real power, the kind that mattered. Her hand tightened around the crystal as she thrust it into the gaping wound she had carved into the creature's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature froze, its hollow eyes glaring at her as if confused. Then, slowly, a change began. The creature's body convulsed, dark veins pulsing beneath its skin. It dropped her, its limbs flailing as it tried to claw the crystal free. A deep, guttural scream tore from its throat, shaking the very ground beneath her feet. The selenite began to glow, bright and blinding, and with a violent burst, the creature exploded. A shockwave of energy rippled out from the epicenter, radiating through the park. The zombies, creatures, and all manner of eldritch horrors in the surrounding area dropped dead in an instant, their ties to the Hollow Specter severed. At the center of the devastation, the warrior lay on the ground, breathing heavily. Bits of the creature's body were scattered around her, dissolving into nothing. She wiped the blood and grime from her face, staring at the remnants of the Hollow Specter. "Happy Halloween, motherfucker," she muttered, her voice rough with exhaustion. The warrior sat up slowly, her muscles aching from the battle. The tomcat padded over to her, licking its paw as if the whole fight had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She chuckled softly, reaching into her pack and pulling out a piece of beef jerky. She tossed it to the cat, watching it as it caught the snack with ease. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The tomcat paused, chewing slowly, and the warrior gave a slight nod, an unspoken acknowledgement, a silent understanding. A debt had been paid tonight. She'd saved the cat's life, and it had returned the favor. In this world, where life and death were in constant balance, such moments meant something. With a quiet breath, the warrior stood, checking her weapons and adjusting her pack. The battle was over, but there was more to come. She began to walk away, her silhouette outlined by the pale moonlight. The tomcat followed her into the shadows, silent as ever, as the two disappeared into the night.
Ah, dear travelers, such is the tale of a hunter who fights in the shadows, not for glory, but for survival. And though she has triumphed tonight, the world is vast, and darkness always finds a way to creep back. But perhaps, for now, there is peace in the small victories, an unspoken understanding between warrior and beast, between life and death. But beware, for the night is long, and the hunt never truly ends. Remember, as you lay your head to rest, the veil between worlds is thin, thinner than you may think. Happy Halloween. Sweet nightmares, dear friends. Sweet nightmares.
If you're enjoying the stories from the Ranger's Grove, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you.